Some powerful readings. We hear these words, power and authority. And for many people, those words, power and authority, can be very different terms. They can call to mind instances of abuse of authority or examples of oppressive power. Today, in many parts of our country, certain forms of power and authority are being challenged. Protests, calls to defund the police. Yet in another sense, we also pray for authority and leadership as we face the ongoing spread of this pandemic. We desire clear, informed guidance from our elected leaders. Some of us might even be grateful for mayors and governors that have ordered us to wear a mask. Today's first reading and the gospel speak to us about power and authority, specifically Peter's power, his authority in the church and in the kingdom of heaven. This particular gospel has become the scriptural text, the basis that everyone points to justify the power of the papacy. Peter was nicknamed the Rock, Petrus, of the church, and was given the keys to the kingdom of heaven. The Pope is the successor of Peter, and so Peter's authority became the Pope's authority. But here's the question: why was Peter given that authority? And what does Matthew's gospel tell us about the authority of the church and those of us who belong to it? 3 of the 4 gospel readings this month feature an encounter between Jesus and Peter. 2 weeks ago, Peter saw Jesus walking on water and went out to meet him, but he doubted and began to sink. "Oh, you of little faith." Next week, we'll see Peter resisting the fate that awaits Jesus. And once again, he is admonished, "Get behind me, Satan." In these passages that surround today's gospel, Peter's clearly an imperfect disciple. His faith wavers. He misunderstands Jesus, his message. He doesn't seem to get it. Even in our own time, church leaders still sometimes get it wrong. They don't quite get the message. But today, we see a different Peter, a moment in Peter's life. We're witness to this dramatic event in that relationship between Jesus and his closest disciples. They're up in the region of Caesarea Philippi, which is the northernmost part of Israel. That particular location is where the Jordan River starts to flow. It comes out from a deep spring, and it's up against a wall of mountain. It's just absolutely huge. It just stuns you, the rock. You look like you're looking at just a giant wall. This community, it was home to both Gentiles and Jews. So Jesus, turning to his disciples, who he knows have been mixing with the people, says, what are people saying about me? Who do they say I am? And they give various answers. You could be John the Baptist, come back from the dead. You could be Elijah, whom people believed would come back to earth to announce the Messiah. Jeremiah, one of the prophets. But then Jesus turns to them and says, "But who do you say that I am?" And it's Simon Peter who speaks up, and he gets it right. He has this inspiration, this thought: you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And on this single statement of faith, This act of correctly naming who Jesus is, Jesus turns and makes him the rock, the foundation of his church, and invests in him the authority and the power of the kingdom of heaven, which is symbolized by the keys. Peter, that flawed human being, understands who Jesus really is, the one sent by the living God. In spite of everything else, he's got that figured out. He's declared the rock, the foundation of the church. And because of who he is, not because of any particular skills, any higher learning, any education, any connections, he is the rock because he understands who Jesus really is. And that's the foundation of his authority. He understands who Jesus is. And that's the key. But there's irony in this, because the rock carries a lot of different meanings, and in Peter, he'll be seen as one of the weakest disciples before he becomes the strongest, before he becomes the leader of this new church. After the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus, it will be the leadership of Peter that unites this entire community of believers. They will become literally the voice of Jesus Christ. But this particular gospel and the way we see Peter gives us all room to recognize and celebrate other disciples who see Christ, who have a relationship with Jesus, who see him as he is. They may not be in a position of power or authority. They might not be ordained or employed as parish leaders. They could just as easily, and most likely are, individuals who are members of the church. Those who live their lives reflecting a relationship with Jesus. One couple who comes to mind for me, since I volunteered there for quite a while, is Louise Zwick and her late husband Mark. They founded and managed Casa Juan Diego. But we could also say the same thing about all the people who work at Catholic Charities, or at Star of Hope, or any of the other volunteer organizations that help us take care of our brothers and sisters. This is the kind of lived authority, the kind of witness and testimony to the gospel that opens the doors to the kingdom of heaven. That is the authority that makes Christianity credible. It's this kind of authority that every one of us can claim if we live the gospel message. It's an authority not based on our status. It's an authority in line with Peter's, based on our faith in Christ, the risen Lord. But like Peter, sometimes we will doubt our faith, and we may begin to sink. We can misunderstand what Jesus teaches. We can become stumbling blocks. We can be in the way of good things. But that leadership of Peter and his successors is not one of coercion or political power. It's a leadership built on example and service. So as long as faith, hope, love are strong in our community, this is a community that can flourish. Any exercise of human authority requires humble and constant recognition of the authority, of God's authority. To the one who invites us all to walk on water, to do something out of the ordinary, to represent Jesus the Christ to the people around us, to take up his cross, to live our lives. In a way, we are all called to solidarity with Christ. And so, let no one walk alone.